Hello and welcome to this ADHD Masterclass. This Masterclass is aimed to deliver the practicalities of the condition. There are theories out there and treatments and so on as well from a clinical perspective. That's not the purpose of this particular talk. What I deal with as a person with ADHD, and I think that this is very important to me as a person with this condition, it's very important that people understand the day-to-day practicalities, because that's what I think matters most. If people understand the condition from a practical perspective, then improvements and changes can be made to make everyone's life easier. Now, we're going to talk about how the condition affects people. There's a little bit of my story in there as well. And there's lots of practical advice and guidance from different perspectives. We have to be aware as well that many people with ADHD have other conditions, whether it be neurodiverse in most cases, but they also may have epilepsy. They may also have PTSD. They may have depression, anxiety. But the other conditions it may have, which we're not going to get into in this session, but they may have, I've got other videos that explain those conditions. They may have dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, and so on. So it's not just the ADHD you've got to consider, it's what other conditions do they have. Now, one thing we have to remember is that ADHD is not connected to intelligence. It is one of the key factors about ADHD is that it's how the brain is constructed, but it's how there's a chemical issue within there, one of which is dopamine, and that's the one that carries or fires off the message that one of the billions of messages across the brain, and the chemical is not quite strong enough to fire that to the next part, to the next part, to the next part, and so on. And that's why with memory some people struggle with recall, but we'll get onto that a little bit further on. Now, ADHD is defined by inattention or disorganization, but also hyperactivity and impulsivity. Now, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, used to be given also as one label, as one diagnosis, but the other would be ADD, which is attention deficit disorder. So that's ADHD, but without the hyperactivity. From 2012 or 2013, the diagnosis actually now is ADHD brackets with or without hyperactivity. Approximately 3% of the population in the UK, which is about 2 million, of all ages have ADHD or ADD. Unless I specifically refer to ADD, when I say ADHD, I mean both. I have ADHD, but as I said, we'll get onto the differences further on. Now, there's three main types. Now, the first, in no particular order or priority, is that you're either predominantly inattentive, or the second is you can be predominantly hyperactive or impulsive, and there is the combined diagnosis. So the combined diagnosis, and that's actually the most common, where there's elements of hyperactivity, impulsivity, as well as inattention and disorganization. Now, the inattentive type, that really focuses on where people have difficulties, for example, with attention to detail. It might be that they have difficulty focusing or sustaining focus, but also difficulty with organization, and it may be that they're easily distracted. The hyperactive or impulsive element is that they may be squirming and fidgety. They're driven by a motor. They don't seem to be able to stop. They like to touch and grab things, but without able to choose. And they might want to be blurting things out, or there's a frustration issue as well. which we'll get onto again. Children with an ADHD, if they have the hyperactivity element, as a child, the hyperactive element is there. Not in all children with ADHD, but when you have hyperactive ADHD as a child, that will, as you grow and develop into adolescence and adulthood, will become more impulsive. So the hyperactivity, whilst may still be there to an extent, that dissipates and presents itself as being impulsive. Now, there's different types of attention, and we have to bear that in mind. That there's focused attention, being able to divide our attention. So we've got lots of different projects on the go, or you're working from home, so you've got the children to look after, the dog needs feeding and walking, work are chasing you for something, and it's trying to divide your attention between whichever needs your priority at that moment. Alternating is quite difficult as well. So knowing when to alternate, as well as being able to alternate. With ADHD, our levers are not under self-control for any of the presentations. Selecting, as I say, knowing what to pay attention to, similar to alternating, but the selective is the actual knowing way which to pay attention to, and then obviously being able to alternate. And once you get there, and you've said, right, okay, that's what I'm going to focus on, being able to sustain attention is a difficulty for people with ADHD. When it comes to differences between the male and female brain, and ADHD in particular, in reference to ADHD, whilst there's very slight differences, and it's more subtle to diagnose and difficult to diagnose in the female brain than the male brain, it's for the purposes of this conversation, they're approximately the same. They're virtually the same. It affects males and females broadly in the same percentage. That said, females are underdiagnosed. It used to be thought of as a naughty boys condition, but it is a lot more than that. There's a lot more than that. There's memory, there's organisation and planning and problem solving, and there's obviously the activation element too, which we'll get onto. There are many successful people with ADHD, including Richard Branson, the entrepreneur, Edison, the scientist, Rory Bremner, and also Lee Mack, who's a very successful, I'm going to say screenwriter, but he's I don't want to say comedian because he's more than that. That's what he started out as, but he's very good. I really enjoy Not Going Out. Now, these people are successful despite an employment rate disparity. Now, if you don't have any kind of disability, then 80% of that group are employed. If you have a physical condition or a heart condition or diabetes, it's in the 60s, 60% are employed. And the bottom two groups are those with a mental health disorder, such as ADHD and others, which is between 10 and 20% of that group are employed. So we always end up being self-employed because of just the way society has understood our condition, or misunderstood it rather. So we end up being self-employed. It's either that or unemployment. And that's why I chose self-employment, because it gives me, the way my brain works, I need to be active all the time. Sometimes I have a low frustration tolerance. Even though I'm a nice, kind, warm, affectionate person, I need things done. And sometimes I can't be waiting for those. I've got this high set of values, and if other people getting in my way as a problem solver, it's going to be difficult. And I used to argue with my bosses because it's like, look, I can see a solution to this problem. I know you can't, but I can. Let's solve it. No, just do it. Well, it's a difficulty for me, partly because of the autism as well that I have. Okay, then, the brain and why ADHD. I briefly touched on it, but there's 4 elements. I touched on chemistry. There is a neurotransmitter, which is the chemical aspect to ADHD and ADD. And I touched on it earlier regarding the transmission of messages. Between the billions of neurotransmitters, there's a chemical that fires that signal from A to B, and then you need a new burst, and then another burst as it fires it across from one post box to the next, the neurotransmitters. And it's been found that in people with ADHD, that chemical, which is dopamine, is reduced. So that's why, for example, with the memory, as I touched on, it's like having the filing cabinet shut or jammed shut. You know it's in there, you know it, but you just need to double check so you can say, yes, that's my answer. And it's very difficult sometimes. So that's the chemical aspect to it. There is a structural difference and function. The frontal lobe is where essentially the ADHD element comes from. And there's a lot of, there's different parts of the brain for autism too, but autism also is associated with the frontal lobe. And that's where the memory, organisation, planning, it's the executive functions of the brain. It doesn't mean that we can't do things and we're not intelligent. It just means it's like driving a car on, with deflated tyres. You've got to drive really slowly, and it's a sluggish ride. You know the intelligence is there, and you know the knowledge is there, but just driving it forward is sometimes a little bit difficult. But with reasonable adjustments, you pump up the tyres, and you get a better journey. There is, in families, it does run in families. You can't catch ADHD. It's not always true that the next generation will have it, but it's highly likely. I have a son. My wife doesn't have ADHD or autism, but there's a 50% chance, because of me, that he has that condition. I don't think actually he has the condition. But he's 14, it's yet to manifest itself, possibly. Additionally, when it comes to families, obviously you're thinking, parenting. Can bad parenting trigger ADHD? No. That's a categoric no. It is a myth. But what you can do as a parent is, when that child and then teenager has difficulties, there are ways that you can help, and there's also ways that you can hinder. And that's a matter for exploration, to make sure that you're helping. Because every child is different. They may have another condition. There's obviously their personality in there. There's a value system in there. And so there's lots of different factors. And that moves nicely onto the environment. The environment, similar to parenting, is a trigger for ADHD, but it's not the cause of the condition. Like, for example, if I'm at a nice, quiet train platform, there's a few people about, I'm going to have a nice, relaxing journey. It doesn't matter whether I'm going from King's Cross to Newcastle or I'm going from Wakefield to Leeds. But as soon as it's busy, that's when I have the difficulties in it, and I get frustrated, or if I've got to queue, or my reserved seat is cancelled. It's not the reservation being cancelled per se that's a difficulty. It's the fact that I'm unable to sit out the way in a nice, calm, quiet spot. So, and that would cause me more difficulties than the journey itself. Like I was on it was during the really hot summer of 2019. It was the beginning of August, and the company had cancelled the actual train I was getting on was my train, and I got a seat reserved on there. And I relaxed. I didn't think about it. I thought, I've got a seat. Let everyone rush about. I've got a seat. Unbeknownst to me, the train company had cancelled all seat reservations, and that included for disabled people as well. Now, there's obviously those with mobility issues who definitely need a seat, and also with hidden disabilities such as, MS, but also things like ADHD and autism and so on. Because if I'm stood in the way, in the doorway or wherever, there's always people trying to get past, and that is like I'm trying to move and trying to be polite and one thing and another, and it's causing stress and anxiety. And because ADHD were problem solvers, that's a problem. I need to solve it. So to solve it, I just need to get a seat somewhere. And eventually I did actually get a seat. Somebody did. The train company did make sure I got a seat. Okay, moving on to the behavioural consequences of ADHD. Now, again, they're manifested in the executive functions, which comes from the frontal lobe here. There's working memory. Now, primarily that is, I mean, there's some debate on how long is working memory, I think that it's the transition in from holding it in mind and a short-term thing to long-term memory. Now, from my understanding, it's up to about 4 weeks, I think. But it's anything from a question you've just heard, therefore you need the answer, or you're asking the question and you're waiting for an answer and you're holding something in mind. So you need to hold something in mind, but also it's accessing stored information. And if you can't recall that, now if you're in a meeting, a team meeting or down at the sports club trying to organise something as a hobby, and you can't recall something, it's embarrassing, and especially when you've got that conflict of really good intelligence, and you're like, well, I know this. So we're going to get onto reasonable adjustments later, but you've got to bear that in, and mental health too. You've got to bear that in mind. Now, activation is quite key. It is another one of the four key areas, and that obviously arousal, for example. So that's getting started on a project. Our levers are not under self-control. So pulling the lever, I know I want to pull the lever, but pulling that lever to actually get started is virtually impossible. I cannot just choose. If I think, okay, I want to wash the car, or the car needs washing, I can't, it might take me a week to get round to doing it. Or I might do it straight away. Because I'm either over or under aroused. So if I'm over aroused, I might blitz the house. I might whistle through that project in no time at all, possibly to the detriment of everything else around me. But that will be done very, very quickly. Or other times, I'm under aroused, so it won't get done, or it'll be delayed before there's a good start. And that inconsistency can sometimes cause a few difficulties, because sometimes there's no known pattern to this with myself and others that I've spoken with ADHD. There's no known pattern to this. It's just random. You can be sometimes difficult to get going, virtually impossible, and other times you need prompting. And other times it's just, yep, I'll do it. Sustaining that effort is very difficult. So you might start on something, even if you're interested in it. It's very, very difficult. And we complete tasks in a very different way to other people. we don't, I'm speaking as a male brain here, yes, I know we don't follow flat pack instructions as our half of the species, but as a rule, people with ADHD, we look at a problem and we just intuitively try and solve it. We don't always follow those instructions, whether it's be written down or whether it's verbally given to us, or it's just the general understanding, unwritten rule of doing something. And we don't always follow that pattern. But we will produce a very good result, the same if not better. It's just we don't do A, B, C, D, E. We go A, F, C, J, and so on until we get to Z. We will cover every single point as we see it necessary to completing that task. Listening can be difficult too, because even if I'm listening to somebody, it's just one person talking to me, and there's nobody else in the office, or I'm at home, say, and the washing machine's not even on, I will miss sometimes a word, a sentence, or the fact that somebody did talk to me. And it's not me being rude, it's just I've just genuinely not heard them, or I've missed part. Sometimes that's because my brain just at that moment mentions something and it reminds me of something and my brain goes off on a wonder, or I've stopped listening. It may be that's a really interesting person to talk to, but my mind will drift. So make sure when you are talking to somebody that they're still listening, it's succinct, repeat what you say to make sure nothing's missed, clarify that the person has understood what you've said. Waiting our turn can be quite difficult as well. So when I'll get onto emotional control in a moment, we have a low frustration tolerance, but we, as part of the activation element, we have, and there's that impulsivity in there. We can't wait our turn. We have to do it now. We can't wait. Now, moving on to emotional control, we do, as I said, there's a low frustration tolerance with, it might be when I ring up a call centre, if I've got to wait tomorrow for a manager callback, or I've got to wait for a response, I can't wait. I cannot, it takes over my mind, and I'll go into more detail shortly. But I'm just giving you a quick, brief summary, and then we'll go into more detail shortly. We have difficulty reading social cues because if we're, we might miss something. If we're looking the opposite way or we're thinking something, we're not focused on, what, I'm looking at purposefully not the camera, and I'm, what. So it's very difficult. If we miss a smile, or we might misunderstood that as hang on, he wasn't joking, or she wasn't joking. Mood swings are quite common with people with ADHD, and that's not because we're angry people. It's not because we're annoyed, or please don't take things personally. It's just that we have that low frustration tolerance, and therefore we get stressed and annoyed. And partly that as well, because especially when you've got good intelligence and you're struggling to remember something, society demands that your brain works in one way, but actually it never will. It's like trying to fit a HGV engine onto a motorbike or vice versa. It's not going to work. So you've got to be flexible, and that'll get rid of a lot of that difficulty there. Okay, moving on to problem solving. That's the fourth area that we have a difficulty with. Now, bearing in mind, these don't appear on their own. They appear in combination with other elements, and it depends on the situation. We have a difficulty organising ourselves with planning to solve a problem. And it might be that we're either often overwhelmed by that problem, or it could be that we pick the wrong detail. And we're not very good at going back over and self-checking, which, whilst we're good at solving problems, we have problem-solving difficulties. So we will solve that problem to a good standard, but we have difficulties getting there. Time management is quite key, and we can read the time, we can read the clock, I can tell you exactly what time it is. Ask me to do a calculation about time, I'll tell you what that is. But we lose track of time, and we get so focused on a project, and because we're people pleasers, we want to get that project in on time and get it done, and we'll rush through it. It might be stacking a shelf in a supermarket, it might be writing up that report for HR or logistics or wherever it is. We want to get it done, and we have an issue with deadlines. We want to make sure your deadline is met, but at the same time, sometimes we give ourselves unrealistic deadlines. Now, I'm a lot more aware of it now, so I'm in a much better position. But you need, once you know that condition and how it affects you, you can then sort of mould and things around you. But one key factor is, for example, it might take me from putting pen to paper and going straight through it without stopping and thinking. Well, obviously I'll be thinking about the task in hand, but without thinking about anything else, it'll take me 30 minutes. But, so if you said to me, "Oh, can you get this task done this afternoon?" Yep, of course I can. Mark, I need it, it's now 2 o'clock. Can you have it to me by 4 so I can quickly check it before I go home? I go, yeah, of course I can. Without thinking. That's the impulsivity that kicks in there. What then happens is my ADHD comes to the fore again and says, "Okay, Mark, so you want to write down things?" Nope, not your turn today. And so that 30 minutes in real time might take you a day, 2 days, 4 days, a week. It depends on the person and the task and so on. When a problem isn't going right, we're not always good at picking up, finding repair strategies. We are born problem solvers. However, as we go through, it's that self-check thing again. We're not always good at self-checking. We do things, we kind of wing it, for want of a better phrase. We wing it intelligently and constantly calibrating, but we don't self-check. I know that may sound like a contradiction, but we constantly, intuitively, we know whether something's right or wrong or questionable. And so if it feels right at the time, we'll go with it. Okay, I'm going to move on to a little bit more detail about the 4 areas that we spoke about. But overall, generally, people report difficulties with ADHD, difficulties with attention. They'll report impulse control, working memory, timing, and planning and organising. Now, one particular area is staying tuned, and that's where your attention drifts. And that might be when reading, for example. But your attention will come back, but then it may drift again. It might be because you've been distracted by a person coming out of a lift. Or it might be in a meeting, you're distracted by an idea or a thought or something. Being easily distracted is actually one of the headlines, but we can't push a distraction out of our mind. So it's either a thought that we're distracted by, or it might be an object. So it could be if you're, for example, trying to talk to somebody and you work in a supermarket and there's the constant beep, beep, beep of the checkout. then you're going to get distracted, and that conversation that you're having with your colleague is going to be slightly impaired. Not by your intelligence or the colleague's intelligence, but it's impaired by that distraction. So it's not going to be the best outcome for anybody, because you can't input properly, therefore you can't reply and respond and so on. When people have ADHD, if they're super interested in, not just interested, but super interested, it's going to be an absolute passion, then they can hyperfocus. Now, I have in the past done portrait photography. I've tried landscape, but when it comes to getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not, because I struggle with the ADHD to get to bed and sleep anyway, I struggle to get up at 4 in the morning. Either that or staying up all night. But I enjoy seeing a nice landscape picture, either by fellow colleague photographers, or, as you see randomly, as a painting. But I didn't enjoy taking them or editing them or anything like that, and I was just not interested. So I tried and did portrait. Somebody asked me, a friend, when my little boy was young, he said, can you have a picture of our little boy and girl? Yeah, of course I will. I'll give it a go. Because everyone thinks you got a camera, you'll take a photograph of everything. So, I did it. And I thought, hang on a minute, this has triggered something. And I really, really enjoyed taking pictures and chasing these kids around on the beach. Grown-ups, I'm not a big fan of taking photographs of, but I do enjoy, I don't do it at the moment, but I did enjoy under 10s really, give or take. Moody teenagers I kind of ruled out. They make actually good portrait headshots, because it's like that moody look, but that's my area. I was hyper interested in that particular area within an area. Some people find it in they may have an Xbox game, or they might have a hobby, another hobby like football or rugby or something, and they're just so focused on that. Can't focus on anything else, but on that one thing they can focus. Schoolwork or work, they struggle with, but that, they're super savant on, they're an expert on their Xbox, their PlayStation, whatever it might be. Touched on it briefly, but willpower and voluntary control, that's another headline to remember. We cannot, as a person with ADHD or ADD, we cannot make themselves pay attention nor do something unless they're absolutely super interested. That lever is not under self-control. It's difficult. And as long as, once you start to remember that, for any students you might have, or your colleagues, or friends, family, then you'll start to take the accelerator off a bit and help them in other ways. People with ADHD were sometimes great at organising our stuff or desk, but we'll have a difficulty getting started. Or it might be the opposite way around. We're great at getting started, but we struggle beforehand to organise our stuff. Now, again, I briefly touched on it. People with ADHD find it really difficult to go to sleep because the mind's racing, so we'll put the iPad or the TV on or whatever, and so we'll struggle to get to sleep. So then we wake up tired, and that obviously then makes things much more difficult. A sprint rather than a marathon is another bullet point to remember. People with ADHD will struggle to keep up effort on long tasks. So breaking them into smaller chunks is far, far better. Plus it means that we've got that little bit of reward that we need in there, dopamine. Best in a crisis is another headline we need to think about. I know briefly I said earlier that, or not briefly, but we touched on people with ADHD have a difficulty solving problems, but we are best in our brain works best in a crisis. So if there isn't one, we create one. Now, one such example is I was writing an ADHD talk for an organisation. I delivered this talk many times. It was a couple of years ago now, and I started out, and I always make sure that my talks are tailored to somebody's needs. And 4 weeks, I'd already met the organisation and started working with them for a project. And this was an extra thing I was delivering. And lovely people, so I wasn't worried about that. And I'd already been in that particular room where I was going to deliver it, and it was a nice, warm environment. And 4 weeks before, I thought, right, okay, let me tailor this for their needs. I got the paper, I got the index cards. Nothing was coming. So, okay, put it down. I went and did something else. I came back a week later. Nope, nothing. And this went on for the next couple of weeks. And the day before, I thought, right, okay, my brain's in a crisis now. Nope, clearly it wasn't, because I looked, no, nothing. Anyway, had to get up to the train for 6:20 in the morning. So I thought, right, okay, put that down and I'll write them on the train on the way down. Got the cards out, went through nope. Got down all the way down to Gatwick. I was sat in, I forget which terminal it was, but sat in the terminal where the trains are, and in Costa Coffee, an hour before I was due to deliver that talk, and I made the changes and I tailored it to the organisation's needs. And I'll be honest, it's one of the best talks I've ever delivered on ADHD. An hour before the session. My brain, for that particular event, the crisis was an hour beforehand. I mean, I don't see it as a crisis in a traditional sense, but I needed that, right, got to get it done. If it's like, well, I've got 4 weeks, not going to happen. So even it helps with some people, but if you break down and think, right, okay, there's 10 things I need to deliver in this talk. So over 10 days, right, focus on the first, second day, the second and third and fourth. Some people work like that. That leads nicely on to the next headline. We have a difficulty getting our thoughts expressed onto paper. Now, even when we're, highly intelligent, and the penmanship perfectly fine, getting those thoughts onto that blank piece of paper is extremely difficult. And I could be sat looking at that blank piece of paper and it's just not coming at all. Not at all. So we need to make sure that we are flexible and open with that. And one thing I tell people is, if it's not your day, don't fight against your brain. Do not fight against your own brain. It's not your time to write that. Go do something else. This leads into the realistic deadlines thing, because if it's not you need to allocate time within that deadline and think, right, like I said, it might be 30 minutes to write from the top of the page to the bottom of the page. Okay, give yourself extra time because you want to redraft it. And you need to go online and make a few phone calls. So give yourself an hour, maybe 2. Actually, you need to give yourself a few days, maybe a week, because it might not be your time. But again, last minute and all the rest, best of crisis. You've got to find something that works for you. Sometimes with that, I have somebody I do the work, but they sit at the side of me and help me with like, say, if I write the headline down, I think of that as a question. I then answer that question and say, right, okay, what is X? And I have to answer that. A further difficulty is what people with ADHD have hyper or hypo sensitivity to sensory stimuli, light, sound, touch, smell, and so on. And these will be like a computer virus. They're inside our brain until that matter's dealt with. Or that, I love an egg sandwich, but if sometimes it annoys me and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the moment and if I'm overwhelmed or I've got capacity to not be as quite annoyed by that. But somebody eating an egg sandwich or a packet of Doritos on a train or just near me, it's like, ooh, it sends shivers. And it's like a computer virus in my mind. I've got to clear that computer virus. It takes over everything in my head and I can't focus or concentrate. And sometimes I end up with either a bit of a headache or I get that rush of anxiety. And it's very, very frustrating. Now, for noise difficulties, obviously, yes, you can put, when I go to a cafe, I have headphones on, especially if I'm working or I'm not with a family or friends, because that person who's eating quite normally across the cafe is stirring their tea just that little bit too loudly, or they're eating too loudly. I know that there's a specific condition for which I don't have about hearing people's eating, but it's that computer virus. It takes over my mind, and that's all I can focus on. I just want to go over and say something, but I think, no, that's not the right thing. That's not the right thing. And that thing could also be, it could be a train being late. That kind of takes over your head. That's all you can focus on, that train being late. Or it could be, and it's very intrusive and difficult for us to deal with. Now, a further thing to think about is with the impulsivity. For example, it's got to have it now. When that urge strikes, I've got to buy it. And sometimes, in the past, I've had difficulties with paying the mortgage, so now what I do, thankfully I had a really good mortgage company and I've got a good wife, so I now have pocket money, because it means that money's mine, and I know no bills are going to get, I'm going to struggle with. Another issue to think about is rejection-sensitive dysphoria. Now, in short, that is where you feel there's been a rejection and you're sensitive to it, but your mind has misread a situation, so you're misinterpreting something. Like, for example, somebody I know very well, it was pre-lockdown, I was walking down the high street and they were on the phone. I thought they'd seen me. They hadn't, as it transpired, but I thought they'd seen me, and they just crossed the road. And that's all I could think about until I saw them the next week and said, why did you ignore me? And for that week, I'd fallen out with them. They didn't know I'd fallen out with them until I spoke to them. But I said, why did you ignore me? They never genuinely saw me, and it turns out that they were dealing with something, that the child was not seriously poorly, but poorly at school, and I had to move a few things around and bring them home. And the child's very well. It was just a short-term illness. But they were sort of stressed by that. They were worried about the illness of the child. They were worried about the shuffling things around at work. They never even saw me. But that rejection-sensitive dysphoria means I misunderstand the situation and I'm sensitive to things like that. So not getting a like on Facebook or LinkedIn means, do people really like that? Am I doing all right? And that's why a lot of the time we end up jumping and hopping around and changing things, because we're like, am I getting the right response from that? And because of that, we worry. We worry a lot. And I'm hesitant to use the word over, but we over, but you could argue it is an over worry to our peers without the condition. Our memory, we do have generally a really good long-term memory. Now, I touched on working memory beforehand, but our long-term memory is generally really good. It's the short-term memory that's the difficulty. And when you bear in mind we've got all these things to deal with, is it any wonder, with the neurotypical world the way it's set up, that people with ADHD struggle and get frustrated and get agitated, and we drift off, and we're in our own little space. Okay, moving on to strengths of ADHD. You'll find that many people have very good, strong 3D visual skills, which presents itself when you're trying to solve a problem. If you can see it in such a way and visualize it in such a way, you're going to solve the problem much, much better. We also have a high level of alertness. If we're in a state of flow, people around us will say that we're scribbling away and it's almost tunnel vision. But if something happens, if we're hyper-focused, tunnel vision. But when we're working, we're alert to everything around us. It might be a pencil dropping on the floor. It might be somebody parking a car outside. It could be anything. Because we've got these difficulties to contend with every single day, we're very good at solving problems, and we come up with some very good novel solving ideas. And we have a passion and enthusiasm for life. We just crack on with things. We're determined. We don't really give up. We may move on from the sustaining focus, yes, but we move on from, if we're not getting what we need from that project, we'll move on. That said, Thomas Edison was one such example of this. He, after his experiments failed, well, you can never say there's a failed experiment, because it then leads you on to the next and the next and the next, and it evolved. So he evolved his experiments, and it took him many years before he actually went, right. And it was literally a light bulb moment. Being insightful is one key strength as well. Because we have those memory difficulties and not working memory, we kind of have to work on intuition, and we kind of look at things in a slightly different way. We absorb subconsciously and think, okay, that's a better way of doing it, or that's a good way, or is that working? We are very good at being able to switch our demands. So if somebody said to us, Mark, can you work on that project? Well, yeah, okay, I'll get on that. Actually, Mark, can I pull you off into that project? Right, okay, yeah, I'll put that one on pause and go do that one. Can you do this? That's fine. I can switch very, very easily to other projects. I know we have the emotional control issue, but we are very, very remarkably composed in pressure situations that neurotypicals do find quite overwhelming. And I think that's because our brain works best in a crisis. If you need something, if there's a crisis and you need it solving, our brain has to be in crisis too, or accept that that's a crisis. It might be a crisis for somebody else, but if it's not a crisis for you, or you can't see that that's a crisis, then it will be difficult. And that we're very suited, therefore, to being an entrepreneur. I just mentioned Richard Branson, for example, earlier. There are many others. But we're not plagued by guilt for making mistakes, and that's where Edison comes back in as well. And we don't. The more people I speak to, and this is evidenced as well by others, we don't seem to be bound by material objects. We're interested in nice things, but we're not too worried about having the best label because it's a label. I want things because they're nice things, not because it's a particular label. Like, for example, I actually I try and buy things that aren't labelled as much as I can. And I try not to fall into that trap. We are very spontaneous and flexible. We do have, as I said, the issues with queuing, for example, and taking turns and waiting. But that's in a situation, in a moment. But when we sort of sit back and go and think about things, we're like, all right, okay, I'm flexible on that. If you need us to say, Mark, I know it's short notice, but can you do something at 3 o'clock in the morning and get some ideas together? Yeah, okay, of course I will. And I will also, as other ADHDers will, we will just throw ideas. If we can see a better way of doing something, we'll throw an idea at it. This eye for the detail, people think, oh, okay, people with ADHD make lots, there might be a spelling error or something, or if they've written a letter or a CV or whatever. Well, you know what? Yeah, okay, there might be. But we do have an eye for the detail. We're very key on, like, for example, I was when lockdown was eased and it was in the summer, I went to the lakes with my wife and son. And it was quite busy, and we were socially distanced as much as you can in Windermere. And in the buggy, on the bottom, in the little tray at the bottom of the buggy, I think it was about 2 or 3 year old, there was some car keys hanging out that were very similar in colour to the pavement, and 99.9% of people have missed them. I spotted that. My mind, I don't know if it's because of the epilepsy as well, or the PTSD, but ADHDers are always scanning the environment. We're always scanning. We're not in a psychic way, but we're hyper aware of stuff. So I spotted them and saved him some money and inconvenience there. Okay then, going to move on to the reasonable adjustments. Now I'll give a brief overview to start with, and then we'll talk specifically. Now, there are visual prompts that you can use. There's wall charts for routines. Now, these wall charts could be, the brand name is Cisco, but the others are available. But or you can have a whiteboard, and you put different things up there. That's good. But it's there in your face. You can see it every day. Done. Or stick a post-it note to the door. Doesn't matter what you've got. You can have a sticky note as a reminder to your bedroom door, living room door, an office door, whatever it might be, as a reminder. But have several of them. You'll always go make a cup of tea, so put that post-it note next to the kettle. Or put it on a box next to the kettle, and then you've got to keep moving the box to get on top of the biscuit tin. Now, physical reminders are a good thing, but it could be laying things out, for example, that are needed for the next day, and labels as you need them. What I suggest as well for that, you can't really lay things out for the next day if you hot desk. That's a big no-no for people with ADHD, because you need everything laid out and you need that familiarity. What's key as well, actually, there is if you've got somebody, a team leader or a colleague or whoever it is who you refer to for questions, you've got a couple of people you go to for different things. They need to be in roughly the same position each time as well, so they can't be hot desking either. Now, for the working memory, I recommend a large computer screen, and that's because, for example, if I was doing my accounts and I've got my invoice on one screen, and then I've got to flick to the spreadsheet and input that number. And I'm thinking, hang on, was that 1943 or was it 1493? I can't. Was it 1943 or was it 1493? Hang on a minute, so I've got to go back and, all right, yeah. And then by the time you've written it down that many times, it'd have been cheaper to print it off than to buy the amount of ink that it would to write it down. So you can have, this, it means you've got two things open. So you've got the spreadsheet open and your PDF, and you can quickly go, all right, yeah, done, and to your next, and whatever it is. So you've got several things. Now I've got a 13-inch laptop, which for my purposes and difficulties, it's okay. But I think when I'm talking large computer screens, I'm talking a lot bigger than that, like 15-inch, 16-inch, bigger if you want them. Visible clocks are a very good thing, because not only does that allow you to use the use of timers and alarms, it should be encouraged actually as well. It just means you can see quite quickly, very quickly, that your task is just about to end. So you need to finish that off, move on to the next, or whatever it might be. To reduce distractions, I always recommend over-the-ear headphones. The ones with the padding on there, and noise cancelling as well, because that way you can properly cut out all the background noise and distractions. You do need to you can spend £5 on a set of headphones, or you can spend $250 on a set of really good ones. And actually, you know what? Those 250 headphones that I've got are fantastic. They're a beautiful bit of kit. And I really do recommend them. The over-the-ear headphones, noise cancelling. If you ask me which ones there were, which ones they are, I'll let you know. As well, what you need to do is find your own space to work or study with a much reduced level of distraction. Now, every building has, whether it be a college or it might be, your workplace. You'll have a meeting room. You'll have a conference room. Just go use it. If you're more productive in that room than you would be at your desk, then I'm sure your organisation won't mind. Most reasonable adjustments are free. That's quite key, actually, and there's very little interruption to a business, and actually it improves things massively. Now, there's a lot of useful technology and apps out there. They're not a magic bullet, but they are extremely useful. Now, I've tried different list things on apps, but I've got to remember that the app is there. I've then got to go get it and then look at it, respond to it. I've also got to add to it. So there's a lot of barriers that are there. So it's possible that, in a working situation, or if you're a student, go get a colleague or somebody to help you out with that. Now, if you use the wrong app or bit of technology, that can actually place an extra burden on the memory. So yes, this magic bullet, you think, wow, it's going to solve, but it might actually cause more problems. Because like I say, you've got to remember the app's there, you've got to add to the app and so on, and it's going to cause more barriers to getting a task done than it is to actually getting it done. There's lots of to-do lists, but I just use the standard one on my phone because I can add it to my home screen. It's just there. I see it every day. One little tip. Different organisations, I haven't used most technology and software. I know the ones I use. My info app email is a Gmail, a Google email, and every day I get a calendar saying your daily schedule, and it tells you what are things I've got in my diary there. So I get an email reminder to tell me what's coming up that day, which is quite good. I have my scheduler, and I have what I have as well. I put in there is a space blocker, and I just block out time in my diary. I just put space blocker, because then I know I can just quickly cancel that. So I put a space blocker either before a meeting so I can prep for it, or afterwards in case it runs over and there's no anxiety, or if I'm traveling somewhere, I can just relax, chill out. Nobody's going to schedule a call with me. So it helps you put yourself in charge of your diary. Don't let everybody will want to schedule when it's convenient for them, which is great. But bear in mind, you have to be in charge of your own workload. Now, there's some compromise when you're meeting potentially new clients or a colleague. Meeting colleagues, you do need to, one of you needs to move one of your meetings if there's no gap, which is fine, that happens. But you have to be in charge of your own diary. Don't let just other people schedule for you. I have a lot of apps with, there's an app with white noise. And that can help me concentrate and, it helps me relax, which helps concentration. But sometimes I use classical music that helps me concentrate. That's great for studying as well. But I also use certain music. If I listen to like heavy rock music, that's quite a fast pace. So I work that bit faster. Yes, it's a little bit more distracting, but I do work at a greater speed. Now, moving on to distractibility and reasonable adjustments for. Make sure you jot down any ideas or thoughts. Do a brain dump, and it just means you've got out of your head that idea. You can forget it. Well, you will forget about it if you've got ADHD. You forget about it until you need to remember. And obviously, if you just keep going back over that diary, or lots of scribbly notes, and just go through it at the end of the day and go, what's important, what's not. Can I forget about that? Yes. And just build it into the next day and evolve it. During a team meeting, make sure you keep a list of thoughts as they come to you, because that means later on when a question crops up, you've got that point to make, or, I never thought about that particular idea, or it might affect the customer in this way. Later on, by the time you get to ask that, you might have forgotten. Make sure you do one task at a time as well. That's really key, because if you've got yes, we can multitask, although some argue that it's not really multitasking. It's doing one task, a little bit of one task, then moving to another, in short time. Don't actually start that new task until the current one is finished. That's really, really important. Now, for those who have the hyperactivity element, it's really key that you have opportunity and do so to move around, do some exercise, take a walk, run up and down the stairs, health and safety. Have a walk up and down the stairs, go for a little walk. Instead of going for a walk once around the block, go twice, 3 times. Try and bring lunch with you. I know we're all working from home at the moment, but try and bring lunch with you to work, so it leaves you time to exercise. And rather than taking the lift, grab the stairs where you can. Try and, during a meeting as well, or anything, I know you might be intentively listening, and then the listening might cause distractions, but to prevent restlessness, try and take notes, or do some colouring in. You need to speak to your colleagues about that, and just say, look, it's not me being bored. I'm trying to suppress the restlessness so I can then concentrate and listen. Make sure you do throughout the day take imminent breaks just as you need them, but I mean there's the regulation in there as well, but be aware of that. And obviously, depending on your role, you can't just take a break whenever if there's a rush at work. You need to build that in with your colleagues and make sure everyone's happy and safe. Go to the mail room, go to the kitchen, just go do some photocopying, do whatever you need to. Okay, to counterbalance the poor memory or difficult working memory difficulties, rather than taking copious amounts of notes at meetings, because you're not really going to be concentrating on what's being said, and because you're writing down, you're trying to listen and write. That's quite difficult. It's like doing the belly and hand. I'm doing it now, but you've got to hang on. I'm struggling with it now, but it's very difficult to do so, especially when you've got ADHD. It's difficult for anybody. So try and record that meeting so you can listen back to it afterwards. Make sure that you write a checklist, especially for complex tasks. I like to recommend the use of acronyms for when to remember something. Like I have, this is an example. If I'm going shopping, I'm thinking, what do I need? I need bread. Well, okay, let me use the word acronym bread, for example, or it might be fish. It could be anything. Bread. So I need bananas, rice, eggs, apples, and I can't think of something beginning with D. Dime bars. So, and when you're writing a report, for example, as a law student, it's like, where do you start? Well, there is actually a set process for this anyway, but I use the word IRAC, IRAC. What's the issue? This is for a law degree or law report. What's the issue? What's the rule? How does that rule apply in this situation? And therefore, what's the conclusion? What's the judgment? So you can use, if you look up on the internet, there's lots of acronyms, but if you type in IRAC alternative or acronym for report or studying, or it's a key memory tool. I have project books for not only the project A and project B and project C. I also have one for me. And I recommend this to those that work for organisations too. I'm self-employed, but there's things that I need to do that I might forget. When you work for an organisation, when I've been coaching people in the past and they've got working memory issues, they're so focused on getting the task done and those projects completed, they forget about themselves and their own needs. So what I suggest is you make yourself a project. And so if you've got 6 projects on the go, have a 7th project book about you. So when your colleagues say, here's some training opportunities, print that off, put it in a book, and just constantly, every week, just have a quick flick through and find out where you're at with that and set yourself goals to try and achieve that training. How are you going to get the next promotion? How are you going to do your job better? You might be doing it very, very well, but how can you improve on things if it's possible? So make yourself a project too, but each and every project have an update sheet and a quick who's asked what for when and by when. So when you're in a meeting and say you think, right, it's a project, it's a meeting about project number 3. So you pick that, you don't have to plan as such for that meeting. You might just quickly go, reach those 6 departments you're relying on. It might be, research that you're waiting for information back from. There's the legal department, and it might be, something else. But you need to know what's going on, and in that project book, bang, done. You're not constantly working on it, relying on your memory difficulties. So that counterbalances that. Another key point is as well, I have a diary. Now I recommend an A4 diary, but because I travel up and down the country and I like it in my bag. I've got a small one. But whenever somebody asks something of me, I write it in the diary. And I just write, Mark Charlesworth asked for Zoom meeting to discuss a neurodiversity masterclass. And I just quickly go through it and I can tick off when I've done it. I don't need to put in that diary the actual meeting, and I don't need to put anything else. All that is for a record of when I was asked something and by whom. So I can quickly go through it and tick, 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 tick. Now you can use, if you've got different coloured themes and projects, use different coloured pens. So you're not constantly looking at a long list of red or black or green or blue pen ink. Project A could be the red pen, project B could be, a green, and so on. Now, time management is difficult for people with ADHD. So use a timeline chart, not just on screen either. Use that in front of you in paper that you can handle. And within that timeline chart, make sure you break up larger projects into mini projects. Make sure, and there's lots of little steps in there, and just tick off what you need to do. Because as you tick them off, you can think, well, yep, I've done that. Somebody might come back to you and say, can we revisit something? Fine, that's okay. But as long as you've ticked that off, relax, worry, move forward. Little rewards. We need dopamine as an ADHD. So just reward yourself for something. It might be, for £1, £50, £100, whatever you can afford, into a tin when you've completed a really good project. And then at the end, you can buy something. Treat yourself. Or if you like chocolate, buy yourself some not too often because you'll end up the size of a house, but have a bounty bar or something or whatever. At the end of each element, or a cup of tea or something. Make sure you program, for example, your computer to beep, 5 minutes after or before rather every meeting on the calendar. So you in plenty of time, you're not rushing around, you're just there. Also, speaking of calendars, make sure you avoid over-scheduling. Again, we're people pleasers, so we'll want to meet and speak to everybody, and we're impulsive and we'll say yes to everything. Was it Richard Branson? He says, say yes and then work out how to do it later. ADHDers, intelligently, and we calibrate everything and it's calculated, but we wing it. We say yes and work out how to do it later. But when scheduling, make sure you're really accurate with your time frame. Yes, it might take you to write that essay for college 4 days, but you know what? You've got ADHD. Counterbalance your own difficulties. So give yourself an extra week maybe, or a few days, or 2 weeks, depending what else you've got in your calendar. You need time out as well. Don't forget that. You need to make sure you give yourself some time out. So be aware of your condition and make sure you put those realistic timescales in place. Now, when it comes to paperwork and detail, I have a rule that only ever handle a piece of paper once. If I've got to handle it more than once, that means I'm coming back to it constantly. Just get on with it, deal with it, and then file it away, and it's done with. If you have the opportunity for delegation of tasks at work, for example, where you can, do it. But obviously, if you're delegating some work, make sure you take other work as well from people. Don't just give your work away. Take some in as well. And it may be where your strengths are, focus on bringing those towards you. and that gives a colleague, for example, time to help and support you. Same with emails, but when you've got papers piling up on your desk, right, just keep those there that are in use. Just purge the rest. You don't need, if they're not in use, file them, get rid of them. You can always go back to them if you need them. And then if filing, if you have to, I mean, it doesn't particularly bother me, but a lot of people find that by colour coding things, it just makes it a bit more interesting. And now, people with ADHD may procrastinate a little bit or a lot. And other than breaking down the large work into small chunks, be aware that the ADHD brain actually switches off or drifts after about 20 minutes. So make sure you do take regular breaks. Now, the Pomodoro system works quite well for a lot of people with ADHD. Doesn't work for everybody, but it is a good system. Make sure as well you've got a deadline for a task. It might be, a 10-minute job, or it might be a week, or whatever it is, or a 6-month project. Make sure you've got a clear, set deadline. And always try and make sure you're working within a team or with another student that manages time very, very well, because they can help you with that time and just give you a little elbow, nudge you forward. Thank you for listening and watching this video. I'm very grateful for your time. There's lots more to tell you about ADHD, and I've tried to give you as much as I can within the space of an hour. I have other videos, and I have some of them just a couple of minutes in length, some of them an hour, some of them 20 minutes. So I want to tell you everything as much as I can to help you. So get in touch if you've got any questions or you'd like me to deliver this live. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.